You hear it everywhere. Speak your truth. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you stare into the chaos of the world and retreat inward, not from cowardice, but from clarity, because the noise outside is loud, but the noise inside is deafening. There are moments when silence seduces you, not as absence, but as resistance, when every word feels like betrayal, when speaking becomes an act of conformity and quiet becomes a kind of power, a rebellion. Nietzsche understood this. He knew that silence is not weakness. It is not void. It is not passivity. Sometimes it is the final stand of a soul refusing to be digested by the herd. But there is danger here too. Silence can liberate and it can imprison. It can be the courage to transcend or the fear to confront. It can be wisdom or it can be the slow suicide of the spirit. So the question becomes, when does silence elevate us and when does it erase us? Let's begin. When speech becomes a burden, you speak. They listen, but they do not hear. Your truth filters through 1,000 layers of projection, expectation, and judgment. You feel it, that dull ache after explaining yourself again and again, only to be misunderstood, misused, twisted. And so, one day, you stop, not in bitterness, but in exhaustion, because words, once wings, now feel like chains. Nietzsche wrote, "All profound things and emotions of things are preceded and attended by silence." He knew that speech is not always expression. Sometimes it is dilution, translation, a compromise between the infinite depth within and the shallow ears of the world. To speak is to bleed meaning into a language that cannot hold it. So you begin to withdraw, not from connection, but from the futility of being heard by those who do not seek to understand. You start to suspect that maybe silence is not emptiness. Maybe it is the birthplace of everything real. Language as a cage of the herd. Words unite us, but they also condition us. From the moment you learn to speak, you learn which words bring approval and which bring rejection. You shape your voice to fit the room. You learn to bite your tongue, to soften your edge, to frame your truth so it doesn't shake the fragile illusions around you. This is not language. This is training. Nietzsche saw it. The herd does not want truth. It wants comfort. It wants agreement. It wants pleasant noise. And so, language becomes a mask, a currency of the social order, where silence becomes the only honest act left. When everyone is shouting in unison, to say nothing at all becomes the loudest scream. The Nietzschean suspicion of communication. Nietzsche distrusted language, not because he was a recluse, but because he understood its limits. He knew that truth, once spoken, becomes something else. It becomes infected by the need to persuade, to impress, to be accepted. All language is metaphor, he wrote. To speak is to simplify, to translate the soul into syllables that others can digest. But what if your soul cannot be digested? What if your truth resists summarization? Then silence is not suppression, it is preservation. And in that silence, you begin to hear something else, something purer than explanation, the raw presence of being. No filter, no applause, no translation, just being. The quiet rebellion of the thinker. In a world addicted to noise, silence is subversive. When you do not post, when you do not perform, when you do not rush to fill every gap in conversation with agreement, you become a threat. Your quietness unsettles those who need constant validation, because silence implies something dangerous. Independence. Nietzsche's Übermensch does not babble for approval. He speaks when necessary, and not to please, but to disrupt, or to create, or to clarify the fog, but never to entertain. The thinker walks in silence, not because he fears being wrong, but because he knows that most speech is not truth-seeking. It is herd-seeking, belonging, camouflage. But he is not here to belong. He is here to see, to burn away illusion, to forge value. And so he becomes quiet, not out of timidity, but out of fire. There is a silence that numbs, and there is a silence that awakens. Nietzsche reminds us, to speak is to risk being devoured, but to remain silent is to risk becoming invisible. Somewhere between those poles is a silence that sees, that chooses, that waits. Not all silence is golden, but some silence is divine. The overman and the refusal to explain. The overman does not explain himself. He does not beg to be understood. He walks through the world like a flame through dry grass, unafraid, unapologetic, untouched by the need to be translated. Why? Because the highest truths are not up for debate. Nietzsche's Übermensch lives beyond justification. He has outgrown the compulsion to argue with the blind. He sees that to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you is not noble, it is wasteful, and so he becomes silent, not because he has nothing to say, but because he sees that most ears are not open, only waiting to reply. In a world addicted to commentary, the refusal to explain becomes an act of power. It is saying, my truth is not a product for consumption. Why the strongest voices say the least. The lion doesn't roar for approval. The mountain does not scream its majesty. The sun does not defend its brilliance. Power, real power, is quiet. Those who carry shallow truths must shout. They must market, convince, plead. But those who carry depth do not need applause to validate their being. Their silence says more than 1,000 clever phrases ever could. Nietzsche understood that the strongest voice is not the loudest, but the most anchored. And anchored people do not flinch when ignored. They do not tremble in silence. They know not everyone deserves to hear your voice. Not every stage deserves your truth. There is strength in walking away mid-sentence, in keeping your gold from those who cannot tell it from dust. Stillness as sovereign territory. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is sovereignty. In a world driven by reaction, replies, posts, tweets, reflexes, to be still is to reclaim your center. It is to live from your axis, not from their chaos. It is to know what moves you before you move. Nietzsche's ideal was not the frantic activist, nor the passive saint. It was the creator, the one who builds meaning from within. And no creation comes from panic. Stillness is the womb of vision. It is the forge where thought becomes will, where instinct becomes direction. It is the space where you stop echoing and start becoming. You are not here to keep up. You are here to root down. Silence, chosen consciously, is a boundary drawn in the sand. This is my mind, and not everything gets to enter. When silence becomes divine, there is a moment in every seeker's life when the words run out, when the books, the teachers, the voices, all fall short. And in that silence, something ancient stirs, not a god in the sky, not a voice from above, but the God within, the one Nietzsche said we must become. In sacred silence, you meet the self without mask or metaphor. You are not your name, not your job, not your beliefs. You are the watcher, the breath, the pulse of something beyond language. This is not escapism, it is arrival. And once you've tasted this unfiltered being, you no longer need to be seen to exist. You no longer need to be heard to feel real. You carry divinity not in your speech, but in your presence. You once believed that silence was emptiness, that to be quiet was to disappear. Now you know silence is presence unchained. To speak from silence is to speak with fire. To act from stillness is to move with meaning. And to walk through noise without being touched by it is power. Fear hiding behind peace. You tell yourself you're peaceful, that you don't like conflict, that you prefer to keep the energy calm. But beneath your calm is a tremble. You're not choosing silence, you're avoiding rupture. You're protecting a fragile harmony, a peace built on suppression, not strength. Nietzsche warned of this kind of avoidance, the kind that dresses up as virtue, but is rooted in fear. It's not the silence of the sage, it's the silence of the scared, the terrified, the invisible. You don't speak your truth because you fear what it will cost. And so you whisper your convictions in private and smile in public. You walk on eggshells and call it grace. You betray yourself slowly and call it maturity. But fear disguised as peace is still fear. And every time you swallow your truth, you shrink. The lie of neutrality. You stand between two sides and say, I don't choose. You watch injustice and say, it's not my place. You see the wound, the violence, the lie. and say nothing, because you believe that silence is noble, that staying neutral means staying clean. But Nietzsche reminds us there is no neutrality in the face of power. To be silent in the presence of harm is not to remain outside the game. It is to play for the dominant side. To not choose is to allow others to choose for you. You cannot be untouched by the world. You are in it. Every silence you keep, every truth you withhold is a position, whether you name it or not. The coward does not always run. Sometimes the coward sits still and calls it wisdom, but the soul knows the difference. When silence protects oppression, you stay quiet to keep the peace. But whose peace are you protecting? You don't speak up when your friend mocks the vulnerable. You say nothing when your partner crosses a line. You lower your eyes when systems crush the weak and call it minding your business. But this is not morality, it is complicity. Nietzsche loathed the good man, not because he hated virtue, but because he saw how often virtue was just cowardice in costume. The good man keeps things pleasant. He avoids confrontation. He stays silent, not out of wisdom, but because speaking would cost him comfort. But silence in moments of truth becomes a weapon, a passive shield for power. Sometimes the loudest scream of support for injustice is your silence. The ethics of voice versus the safety of shadows. You've been told that to be wise is to wait, that to be respectful is to keep your opinions soft, that silence is golden. But sometimes silence is safe, as in safety is a cage. Every moment you choose comfort over truth, image over integrity, you trade your voice for a mask, and slowly you vanish behind it. There is an ethic of speech, a responsibility, but there is also an ethic of silence. And it is this, that when your voice could wake someone, could protect someone, could free you, and you say nothing, that silence is no longer sacred. It is surrender. Nietzsche dared to say what others would not. That the soul atrophies not just from lies, but from silence. From watching the fire and choosing not to feed it. Not all silence is golden. Some silence is rust, a corrosion of the spirit. You must ask, is your silence born of power or protection? Is it the silence of the sage or the silenced? Is it the silence of the free or the afraid? Because in the quiet, you are either reclaiming your voice or slowly losing it. Nietzsche's silence, at the end, he spoke with fire, with fury, with poetry etched in blood. But at the end, silence. A man who challenged gods, morality and mankind, rendered mute in a Turin street, arms wrapped around a beaten horse, tears in his eyes. After that day, Nietzsche would never speak again. What silenced him? Some say madness, some say compassion, too heavy for the world. Others say the mind, having flown too close to truth, simply fractured under its own clarity. But perhaps Nietzsche's final silence was not collapse, but culmination. The philosopher who declared that we must become gods to be worthy of this world, perhaps he found in that final quiet the threshold beyond language, beyond logic, beyond the need to be understood. Perhaps his silence was transcendence. The sound of the abyss, Nietzsche wrote. When you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. But what is the abyss? It is not darkness, it is not evil, it is not death. The abyss is silence, not absence, but infinity. The raw, terrifying stillness that remains when all illusions have been stripped away. No gods, no laws, no meaning, just you and your breath and the crushing responsibility of existence. It is here that many break, because the silence does not comfort, it demands. It forces you to become your own meaning, your own voice, your own law. You can scream into the abyss, or you can let it teach you how to stand. But you cannot ignore it, not forever, because the abyss is not out there. It is within. Solitude as sanity or insanity. He who is never alone never meets himself, but he who is always alone risks dissolving. Solitude is sacred, but it is also sharp. In the beginning it feels like freedom, the shedding of masks, the breath of your own thoughts echoing without interruption. But over time it tests you, without others to mirror you. Who are you? Without applause, are you still real? Nietzsche lived most of his life in solitude, not loneliness, but isolation. He rejected the herd. He lived in mountains. He wrote for readers yet unborn. And for a while, solitude was strength, until perhaps it wasn't, because the same walls that protect your soul can become a tomb. The same silence that sharpens your mind can swallow it. Sanity frays when the echo is the only voice left. Solitude is a threshold. Cross it consciously, or it will cross you. When no one listens and you stop speaking, there comes a point when the world stops listening. When your words fall like stones into a void. When your attempts to connect only deepen the silence around you. And so you stop speaking, not as a choice, but as a response. Why speak if no one hears? This is not the silence of power. It is the silence of pain, of a voice that once burned now, buried under years of being dismissed, misunderstood, erased. Nietzsche saw this, not just in himself, but in the fate of all who walk ahead of their time. They'll understand later, he seemed to say. And they did, but he never got to hear it. So many who burn bright burn alone. But here's what Nietzsche teaches us, even in his silence, that even when no one listens, you must still speak. Even if the world doesn't hear you, you must hear you. Even if your truth is met with silence, it still matters, because meaning is not given, it is created. And your voice, even if heard only by the void, is real. The silence at the end is not a death, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, you either vanish or you arrive. You decide. Speaking without pleasing. You've spent your life shaping your voice to fit the room, softer when they flinched, louder when they clapped. You've coated your truth in politeness, in diplomacy, in caution, all in the name of being heard. But what you've really been doing is performing, and every performance is a betrayal. Your voice was not made to decorate silence. It was made to disrupt it, to awaken, to reveal. Nietzsche did not write to comfort, he wrote to pierce. He did not whisper what people wanted to hear. He roared what they couldn't bear to see. And in doing so, he did not become popular. He became eternal. If your voice requires applause to be spoken, it isn't your voice, it's your fear in disguise. So speak, even if it shakes, especially if it shakes, because your silence has already said too much. Silence as choice, not habit. Silence can be holy, but it can also become habitual, a default mode of hiding, numbing, disappearing. The difference is intention. When you choose silence, you are sovereign. You are listening inward. You are creating space. But when silence chooses you, when it becomes your refuge from fear, you are no longer still. You are stuck. Nietzsche's silence, at its best, was sacred. He walked away from the herd not out of fear, but to protect the sacred fire within. His silence wasn't passive, it was preparatory. The quiet before the thunder. So ask yourself, is your silence clearing space for your truth, or is it burying it? Because the soul cannot breathe if its voice is always in chains. Creating space for real dialogue. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more meaning. True dialogue is not about winning, it's not a duel. It's not validation hunting, it's two fires meeting, not to extinguish each other, but to illuminate what neither could see alone. Your voice, when rooted in silence, becomes a gift, not a performance, not a plea, but a bridge. And this is the paradox. Once you've learned to sit in silence, your words become more real, more grounded, more needed. Nietzsche's best writing feels like it was carved from stone because it came from long, sacred silence. He did not write to impress. He wrote to free, and so must you. Speak not to be liked. Speak to liberate. Speak to open the space where truth can finally breathe. Becoming thunder after stillness. You've been silent, you've been watching, you've been waiting, but the waiting ends here. You are not here to echo. You are not here to please. You are not here to fade into the background of your own life. You are here to speak, not just with your mouth, but with your existence, to create value where none was given, to disturb the peace that keeps souls asleep. Let your silence end in thunder. Let your voice be the storm that wakes the world, not with volume, but with truth. And if this video cracked something open, if it touched the silence inside you, don't stop here. There is more awakening. More fire, more self to reclaim. So keep walking, keep watching, keep becoming, because the world doesn't need more words. It needs you, unedited, awake, and finally alive.